Greetings, everyone. My name is Anitha Beberg, and I'm the CEO of Save Exchange Corporation. And co-presenting with me today is our amazing, wonderful chairman, Edgar Kahn, who is also known as the father of time banking. Edgar, can you wave to us? Yes, thank you. So in this talk, we're going to cover three main topics, well, 3.5 to be exact. The first is to talk about the current problem, which most of you already know about. You know, there's a pandemic going on. It's to discuss what I'm referring to as the pandemic economy, which we're in right now, and the resulting events. So the second topic is going to be about defining and understanding what time banking is, which Edgar is going to be covering. And third, we're going to be talking about the solidarity economy and why we need to move towards it instead of reverting back to the market economy. Plus talk about the role time banking plays in the solidarity economy. So we will mostly be covering this topic from the US perspective, since both Edgar and I live in the States. So let's go. Okay. So the US has an estimated 30 million small businesses, and if this pandemic persists, another 3.5 million could shut down over the next 2 months. Furthermore, almost 7.5 million small businesses could close permanently over the next 5 months, leaving 37.5 million people currently employed by those businesses at risk of losing their jobs. There are millions of Americans thrown out of work during this COVID-19 pandemic and unable to register for unemployment. An estimated 8.9 to 13.9 million have been shut out of the system, unable to register again for these unemployment benefits. So tens of millions of Americans are still waiting for a stimulus check, including seniors barely surviving on Social Security benefits. So more than 22 million Americans have filed again for this unemployment aid since President Trump declared a national emergency, a staggering loss of jobs that has wiped out a decade of employment gains and pushed families to line up at food banks as they wait government help. So the US has not seen this level of job loss since the Great Depression, and the government is struggling to respond fast enough to the deadly coronavirus health crisis and the widespread economic pain it has triggered. So in terms of asymptomatic or silent transmission, this virus claims the lives of mostly elderly and those with compromised immune systems versus the 1918 pandemic, commonly known as the Spanish flu, that killed both young and old. The 1918, it was called influenza pandemic, was the most severe pandemic in recent history, which it was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of avian origin. Although there is no universal consensus regarding where that virus originated, it spread worldwide during the period of 1918 to 1919. In the United States, it was first identified in military personnel in the spring of 1918. And it's estimated that about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population at the time, became infected with this virus. So the number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with about 675,000 occurring in the United States. What was a mouthful? Sorry about that. Okay, so strict measures to combat the virus seems worse than the disease. You know, some of the things, the cure is worse than the disease discussions are at the forefront of our public discourse. And millions of lives and untold trillions in wealth and income may be saved or lost as the result of public policies shaped by that cliche. In the matter of the coronavirus, In the matter of the coronavirus epidemic and a response to it, the question of is the cure worse than the disease is almost useless, because it asks us to judge one discrete thing we know rather we know about, against a half a dozen critical things we don't know about. So what we know right now is that, here's some stuff in the news, US economy and the world economy, which matters quite a bit to our national prosperity, it's cratering. The coronavirus still is spreading. This seems, from the point of view of many, right now, oh, it's intolerable or unsustainable. I just heard on the news this morning with Michigan, people are, rioting into the state, I guess the building, Capitol building, with guns and things. I mean, it's hard for me to understand, from being in California, where our governor's trying to do the same thing as the Michigan governor. But strict lockdowns by governments, have temporarily sent the economy tumbling, but also left people feeling conflicted between the fear of contracting the virus and the fear of financial ruin. So I get what they're feeling. But we need to put things in perspective. The measures we're taking right now impose terrible economic costs, but a catastrophic pandemic, one that is orders of magnitude worse than what we're currently experiencing, would impose terrible economic costs as well, on top of an unfathomable amount of death and suffering. So, according to the news, in the UN, the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to disproportionately hit developing countries, with estimated income loss to exceed $220 billion in developing countries, since 55% of the global population have no social protection. ABC News reports that due to the COVID-19 crisis, New York State has an unemployment rate of about 13%, the highest level since the Great Depression. So the United States has over 1 million cases of the coronavirus, a little over it, as of just yesterday, which has outpaced all other countries. Our self-governing states that lacked steady, thoughtful national leadership prevented a unified shelter-in-place order like India did. I mean, they're a country of billions, and immediately, boom, the prime minister put a lockdown, right? So we don't have that, based on the way our government is done. Every governor has, a control of their states. And even within the state, cities, mayors have it. So it's a different type of governing. So we also have, which I kind of believe that because we don't have a unified leadership and the way our organization, our government is organized, it could have caused, the amount of numbers that we're seeing that's why it's causing this high rate of cases. So when I mentioned during a pandemic such as this one, I ironically feel that China, a communist nation, seems to be most suitable for overcoming this disease, just because the amount of control they can exert over their people, and the US to be the least suited, considering all the protections we have in place of our individual rights. So I'm going to stop with the gloom and doom and hand it over to a more positive subject. And that is something dear to me and Dr. Edgar Kahn. So yeah, I think Edgar might know a little bit about time banking. Do you think you can help us out, Edgar? You're on mute.
We have always had two economies. One is the economy that's measured by the flow of money that we know as GDP, or gross domestic product, and another, I think, new gross domestic product, which is based on relationships. You may have heard that some work goes on without money. It's minor work, like raising children, keeping families strong, making neighborhoods safe, making democracy work, and preserving the planet, but nothing really important. That's that work usually gets relegated either to nonprofits, which then hire staff to do it, or to a group of people of varying sort who are designated as volunteers. And we can usually mobilize them for a crisis, but then they go home. And then when the next crisis comes, you got to start the mobilization all over again. And they don't really, and by and large, their work is both, we pay lip service to it, but we don't value it. And I decided it was necessary if we were going to really make some significant social changes to build an economy based on equality, that it couldn't just be, well, let's give everybody some money. We also had to ask them to be part of an economy that really created the kind of world we want. And there are at least 3 or 4 kinds of labor that the market doesn't adequately pay for that maybe we ought to reward. One is a strange thing called learning that you may have heard of, and that includes homework, but it also includes lifelong learning. And that takes work, even though it's unpaid work, or even though it's not considered necessarily part of the monetary economy. The second kind of work that might just be of some interest to us is called caring. And maybe we need to care for little babies who can't earn money. Maybe we need to care for the way in which we take care of parks and the environment. Maybe it needs to be used to hold officials accountable, and maybe needs to be used to preserve the planet by environmental kinds of activity that take a lot of labor, but that are called volunteer activities. The third, so you got learning as one major workforce, work activity that needs to go on. You've got caring that needs to go on, that's massive. And some of you may have heard that people are getting older. There's a rumor to that effect. And some of them may be frail, and and a large portion of them are living alone without families and without extended support systems. And the third is civic engagement, which just might impact on things like elections and on corruption and on the way in which money is spent to proliferate profits without generating any benefit for people. So I developed a kind of money called time banking and there are multiple, and you'll hear about them later. There are multiple software systems, because if you're going to put people to work, you've got to have a software system that has an inventory of the capacity that you have not tapped. You have to have a software system that keeps track of the flow of hours or time or effort that goes forward. And you have to have a software system that generates reports that tells you what's going on and what you need to do. So there are multiple software systems. One that I developed was called Community Weaver, and then we work with Anitha and Seva to create what I'm hoping will be the next generation of software, because we have to integrate software with the power of social media to really integrate it into smartphones and into people's lives in the world that's emerging.
And
Uh,
entice the millennials.
and so I'll flip it to you, but basically what we've done with time banking is really create a kind of industrial revolution that calls for a new method of production, at least in the domains of caring and learning and civic engagement. And if we can put people to work doing I would want to add environmental protection and preservation, because if we do that, we can generate and have generated millions of documented hours of work. So we're not just giving it away. It's not just charity. It's in fact real work that we're for the first time honoring, and not just calling it volunteering and dismissing it and pretend it will come back whenever we need it. I'll throw it back to you, Anitha, to talk about what the environment is that we're hoping to create with this new software. But we need systems, because people will volunteer, but if there's not an organizational format or an initiative or a program that people can volunteer into to help kids, to help elderly, to preserve the planet, to make democracy work, to get voter registration. If we don't preserve those vehicles, then people will say, I'm volunteering, but nobody's taken up my time and my capacity, so I guess there's no point to volunteering. So we need to give it value. And that means we will need to create a new kind of store where people can buy what they need and get the services they need. Now, if you convert time volunteering into market wage prices, you devalue all the things I've been talking about because those are not scarce. The ability to care, to listen, to educate, that has a low price. The ability to make money off of money and generate digits and digits building on digits has a high price, but that's not the value system that we want, that we need to perpetuate in order not just to get past this epidemic, but also in terms of creating the kind of future world that we want to create. Uh, Anitha,
I just wanted to ask a little, just the basics of what time banking is for people who don't know what we're talking about.
time
So
banking is a system that is adopted by either a group of individuals coming together or by an organization that has a philanthropic or social justice or progressive purpose. Uh, in both cases, in the case of people wanting to help each other and just be together, its function is to function as an extended family. And you know what an extended family looks like. You just got, it's not, you just don't have the same family tree. You have a software family tree. If it's an agency that has to generate, that has a mission that's funded, but that never has enough people helping it, and that needs to expand its mission, it needs to enlist the people whom it's serving, not just as consumers of the services they receive, but as co-producers, as co-workers, as co-helpers in expanding the capacity of those institutions and those programs to reach all the people whom it's trying to reach, and to weave a web of connectedness that protects and expands and deepens the impact of those professional services and that expertise which it's licensed to provide. That's what, so time banking works in both ways. It works in the ways of people just organizing themselves around neighborhood or geography, or people organizing themselves in alignment with the mission of a nonprofit or a public program that is trying to address a critical disparity or need.
I think you covered mostly about time banking, but can you briefly just go over the core values since it's
well,
on our
to create any system, you need to articulate the principles that drive that system. We know that greed and self-interest has its own power to run a system called capitalism. And we know that there are both benefits and disparities. I created another kind of, in saying what the hell was I creating when I created time banking, I had to articulate what were the driving principles that generated the activity, that generated the work. And principle one is that every human being, even somebody lying in bed who can listen on the phone, has something to contribute. Every one of us has something to contribute. We are not just passive recipients. The second is we have to redefine what we value as work. Strangely, I thought maybe we ought to value as work the work that goes on in that other economy called raising children and making neighborhoods safe and making democracy work and caring for the elderly and preserving the planet. And I thought maybe we ought to start honoring that by calling it work and not just calling it volunteering. The third principle is reciprocity. I think receiving help is now viewed as charity. I think when you say, I need some help, you're giving another person the opportunity to give of themselves, but that person doesn't just want to be a recipient of charity. That person wants to feel as good as you feel when you're helping somebody. So we ought to empower and we ought to build in reciprocity, saying, I'll give you what I can, but I need you to give what you can to somebody else. And that principle of reciprocity was a driving principle that nobody is just a recipient. Everybody needs to give back, and that principle of reciprocity can be built into all the systems we create. The fourth principle was we call it community or connectivity or networks. But the sum of all the programs and all the initiatives we have is less than the sum total, which is greater than the sum of the parts. You put two people together and you have more than two. Marriage may be one of the purposes. Having children may be another of the purposes. Being family members of a family association. So 1 + 1 in that math is never just two. It's always what are the exponential values that we need. And so the fourth value was community, and the fifth value uh, was respect. We need to amplify and protect the voices of the people whom we're helping. And they may tell us things we don't want to hear, like what you're doing isn't worth a damn thing, or you're doing it all wrong. But we also need their reciprocity. We need them to give, we need to give respect to those voices and protect the voices of dissent and the voices that expand our awareness of what we're doing and the consequences. Because if we don't listen to what the quote customer of our efforts says to us, then we go blindly into the night. And I think we all want that kind of feedback loop. So we need to protect feedback loops that amplify the voices of those who are silent and those who feel disenfranchised. So those are the core values of the time banking system that I created.
So what about through the social justice lens? Can we're running out of time, and so we just
Well,
briefly about the no more throwaway people and.
well, every one of those core values, like every person has something to give, has a flip side. The flip side of everybody has value that says no more throwaway people. The flip side of redefining work is no more subordinating, no more using the service that, no, it means valuing work that we have taken for granted, frankly, from women and from minorities and from disenfranchised groups. The third value has of reciprocity of paying it forward, means no more exacting subordination and dependency from when you give help. That those people are no less valuable, and we need to honor them by incorporating reciprocity. The fourth was when we rebuild communities, we must stop simply extracting resources from them for purposes of making wealth. In other words, if you have a public service, the fact that there is a public service does not mean that that community ought to be stripped mined of all its talent to take jobs in corporations and in Wall Street jobs. We need civic engagement. We need to honor civic engagement. We need to stop devaluing civic engagement and leave that for somebody else, or leave that for the government that doesn't know what it's doing. And we tend to strip mine communities by devaluing the work of building community. And finally, no more ignoring the idea that we need to build feedback loops. Means we need to amplify those voices, and we need to give those voices power to make corrective steps. And we need to understand that doing so is a social justice mandate, because otherwise we remain blind to sexism and to racism and to ageism and all the isms that are tearing us apart.
Thank you, Edgar.
And
So,
end the pitch on positive affirmation of core values and
yeah.
social justice perspective on each of those values.
So I want to talk a little bit about solidarity economy, because you had mentioned this when we were discussing what we're going to be talking about. So the solidarity economy is a global movement to build a just and sustainable economy. It's an ecosystem of practices that already exist, like time making, some old, some new, some still emergent, that are aligned with solidarity economy values. So the solidarity economy seeks to make visible and connect these siloed practices in order to build an alternative economic system broadly defined for all people on Earth. The solidarity economy also seeks to transform the dominant capitalist system as well as other authoritarian state-dominated systems into one that puts people and the planet at its core. So it also requires a shift in our economic paradigm from one that prioritizes just profit and growth to one that prioritizes living in harmony with each other and nature. The solidarity economy is an evolving framework as well as a global movement composed of practitioners, activists, scholars, and proponents. So I don't know if we have, I don't
And
think we have time to
I'll
go over
add
this.
that in two sentences. We
Mhm.
have what we need if we
Yes.
use what we have, and we have what we need if we share what we have.
Mhm. What you're looking at here in these two diagrams,
Hey
it was,
guys,
huh?
I'm
Oh,
up
we have-
right now,
Okay,
but I'm terribly sorry. I mean, we can
okay,
go on a little bit, but I have a whole bunch of different people coming in, so
okay.
I'm
So
terribly
can
sorry
we
to.
finish in two minutes or?
Sure, absolutely. I love what you're doing, and I want to know more about it because time sharing is a extraordinary concept, and I'm actually in a. Some people go to 12-step groups to recover from alcohol or drugs or money or cocaine or work. There's actually a program about time management, about how we use time in a way that's like an addiction, like always busy, so busy, aren't I cool? And the idea of time sharing is an extraordinarily innovative concept that I, as a New Yorker and business owner, would love to assist in any way that I can. So please go on. And then we're going to segue into doing what you love because I've worked with the Beach Boys and David Bowie, and I'm going to tell you about like my little secrets of doing what I love, which is all about what Edgar said: teaching, community awareness, sharing your wisdom, and also being honored for that in a way that you have a decent living. So please continue.
Okay. I'm going to speed through this. It's just a way to show that how our current the market economy and how, it represents a part of it, the social economy and the lime green part. And in the second diagram, a solidarity economy kind of integrates into the entire economy. So I'm just going to skip through that so we have time. So the solidarity economy will help steer political decisions so that government policies are no longer based exclusively on monetary value and making money, but include responsiveness to social resilience and well-being. Even America's Declaration of Independence, right? The life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it states that people should be free to pursue happiness. So why don't we measure that in our GDP, right? So it's already in there. This social solidarity economy, as it's also referred to, is an ethical and values-based approach to economic development that prioritizes, again, the welfare of people and planet over profits and blind growth, which is an important distinction. Well, how does time making fit as part of this solidarity economy, Edgar? Can you kind of share with us?
Well, I think I'll put it on two levels. Having purpose is life-giving. At the age of 44, I had a heart attack, and which destroyed 60% of my heart, and they gave me 2 years to live, and maybe 2 hours a day I could work. And I said, what am I going to do with 2 hours? And that's when I invented time banking. I'm now 85. My heart is 85% healed. I can exercise at the rate of somebody who never had a heart attack. So I can say on a very cellular level, our bodies need purpose, need meaningful activity in order to live and to thrive. And the same is true if you notice with elections. If people don't participate, then we get what we've got. So the whole nature of how do we build we don't know necessarily where we're going, but we know what we're responding to, and that can shape our purpose. And if we talk to each other, listen to each other, and honor what each other has done, and find ways to honor them that are not defined by market price, but are defined by normative values, we're going to create an economy that we can be proud of. It won't be static, because we have a global economy and a global system, and an ecosystem that is not static. And so we need to be as dynamic as the systems are that we're trying to change and trying to enhance. And that to me is the economy we're trying to create.
All right. I'm due to start now, so I want to thank you guys, I guess, for being in here. And if you can, let me just see if I can do this. Yeah, I hate to take over